Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Zakarin, editor of the New Books Network. Today we're continuing our series on Harry Frankfurt's seminal work, On Bullshit. I have the privilege to speak with Arvind Narayanan, co-author of the book AI Snake Oil: What Artificial Intelligence Can Do, What It Can't, and How to Tell the Difference. Arvind is the perfect guest to explore the subject of bullshit in AI, as AI snake oil takes on the ridiculous hype ascribed to the promise of AI. AI chatbots often hallucinate, and many of the promoters of AI engage in the art of bullshit when selling people on their wild and crazy applications. To break down BS in AI, I'm happy to be joined by Arvind. Arvind, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Caleb. It's good to be here.
I'm really glad to get the chance to speak with you about this subject. When I first started doing this series on Harry Frankfurt's book On Bullshit, of course, I was thinking a lot about AI. It was one of the first things that sprung to mind as something that Harry wrote about without actually writing, knowing that he was writing about it. But a lot of what he says in On Bullshit, I think, can very easily be applied to what we're seeing with the development of artificial intelligence. It's definitely something that you picked up on. But before jumping in and talking about On Bullshit and AI snake oils, when you could just tell us a little about yourself and your work.
Sure. I'm a professor of computer science at Princeton University. And broadly, what I study is the impact of AI and other new technologies on society. And I think the reason why I enjoy doing this work is that, we all suspect that tech has both good and bad impacts on society. And there are many people critiquing that, and rightly so. There are journalists, there are many people with humanities expertise. But when you look at computer scientists, the discipline has generally been around serving the interests of the industry as opposed to being, an external voice of accountability. And so I think there's a real need for folks who can say, look, I understand AI, I build AI, and, I use these AI systems all the time. I understand that they're powerful. I understand the math and the tricks that go into building them, but I also want to tell you about the limitations. So that's really been the flavor of the work that I've been doing over the last few years.
I think it's an important work. Definitely. I definitely use AI tools and products on a regular basis, even just to try them out, just because I'm curious. And, sometimes I am impressed and sometimes I'm very disappointed in it. Definitely disappointed with the some of the developments of the chatbots. It feels like haven't really progressed beyond the past, year or so. I was wondering if you could get into a little bit what you see as some of the biggest misconceptions around artificial intelligence.
Sure. The number one misconception is around the term itself. AI is not one technology, it's an umbrella term for a collection of loosely related technologies and applications. So we've been talking about chatbots, which are a kind of generative AI. I don't need to tell the listeners what that is, but I'm sure we'll get into it more. What a lot of the book is about, though, is predictive AI, a very different kind of AI. This is not AI that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. This is AI that's used by companies and governments often to make decisions about us in the background. So when we apply for a job, our resume might be analyzed by an AI system. In healthcare, these algorithms are often predicting how long a patient needs to be in the hospital, or various other things related to healthcare. In criminal justice, this is a very big deal in the majority of jurisdictions in the US. When someone is arrested, they're assessed by an algorithmic system that tries to predict how much of a risk they are if they were released. And this is being used for incredibly consequential decisions, denying someone their freedom before their trial, which can be months or years away. So it's essentially a form of pre-crime. The key thing we want readers to take away is that, yes, there has been rapid progress in AI, broadly speaking, but a lot of that progress has been in generative AI. And, it still has a lot of limitations that we'll get to. But when you look at this kind of AI, predictive AI, which is about looking at data about a person and predicting what they might do in the future, right? Is this job candidate going to be good at this job? Is this patient going to need a lot of help in the hospital? Is this defendant going to commit a crime if they're released? These kinds of questions. You run up into fundamental difficulties of predicting the future. So all of these predictive AI systems, they're a little bit better than the flip of a coin, but only a little. So you have these systems with like 60% accuracy, where 50% is random guessing. And these are what are being used to make these incredibly consequential decisions about us in, healthcare, criminal justice, education, employment, in credit, in a variety of other domains. And there are a lot of reasons to be concerned about the proliferation of these technologies.
Right. Yeah. So it might be valuable in the context of a casino or of like a high frequency trading firm where, they just need to get 51% of their bets correct. But when it comes to care, we don't want 51% success rate when it comes to care is very bad. Um, I'm wondering if we can get into a little bit how AI does make predictions and some of the limitations on how it does this.
The most prevalent form of AI today is machine learning, which is learning from data. And so the reason AI has been so successful is that it doesn't involve programmers sitting down and figuring out how to, respond to each query or make each decision. It's not a fixed set of rules in the vast majority of cases. What it's learning to do is mimic the patterns in its data sets. So these data sets might be, in the case of a chatbot, it is, as listeners might know, it's text scraped from the internet or from books or other textual sources. In the case of image generators, it's images, perhaps videos from the internet. And in the case of these predictive systems, it's what happened to past patients at this hospital or what happened to past defendants in the criminal justice system. And so, a couple of things worth noting about this. So, this is one reason why, in certain areas, AI has been able to get dramatically better. So, specifically, generative AI, the reason there has been rapid progress, or at least was until 2023 or so, and then it seems to have slowed a little bit. And we've written some articles about that. The reason there was rapid progress is because companies started training these systems on bigger and bigger chunks of the internet on larger and larger data centers. And eventually, of course, they pretty much exhausted the whole internet. And so, in the post scaling world, as it's called, progress has been a little bit much less predictable, I'll say. And so, that's one thing worth noting. And the other thing worth noting is that these systems are going to mimic the good and bad things in the data that we put into them, right? So, companies take a lot of efforts to try to minimize the various biases that get into these systems, but it's always imperfect and there's always a risk of these systems acting up.
The title of your book is, I think, so great because I think that this phrase snake oil just really works well to describe a lot of aspects of things that are under the AI umbrella that do feel like snake oil products. So could you talk about what you see as AI snake oil and why you introduced this term?
Let me give you two examples. In schools and colleges around the world, students are turning to AI to do their homework. And in response to this, many companies have propped up saying, oh, we have cheating detectors. These tools are going to use AI to classify whether a homework text was submitted or written by a person or by AI. So the funny thing is, as far as we know from the research, this stuff just doesn't work. And it needs to work at an extremely high accuracy if you're to be able to use this on millions of students without a spate of false accusations, right? And again, maybe it works a little bit better than random, but only a little. And the result of this is thousands of students around the world are being accused of cheating on homeworks, sometimes with terrible consequences, right? Like suspension from school or college. So this is in my book, one type of snake oil. So not only do these not work very well, they also flag non-native speakers or writers at higher rates, and they have these various kinds of biases in them as well. And people will say, "Oh no, the tech is quickly improving," but we have to keep in mind something fundamental. A cheating detector operates in an adversarial environment. So if cheating detectors get better, then other companies are going to build AI that uses those very improvements to learn how to bypass the cheating detectors, and students are going to turn to those next. So there will never be an equilibrium where we can say, oh, finally, we've cracked the code. The system is accurate enough that we can use this to accuse students. So I think the very existence and widespread use of these cheating detectors is an injustice. I think there are other ways to address the problem of students using AI to cheat. It's something fundamentally that instructors, I think, are doing wrong if students think that this is the best use of their time. So I would rather, the system address the problem at the source rather than the symptoms by turning to snake oil. So we say in the book that broken AI is appealing to broken institutions. So very often the use of AI snake oil is an indicator of something underlying about the system that tends to be broken. So that's one example. Another example of snake oil AI is, and this is the thing that initially got me interested in this topic 5 or 6 years ago, is these hiring automation companies that are going to HR departments and saying, look, you're getting hundreds, maybe 1,000 applications for each open position. There's no way you can manually review all of those. So use our AI system, and the way it works is the job candidate will upload a 30-second video of themselves talking about not even their job qualifications, but their hobbies or whatever it is. And the pitch is that the AI will use the candidate's, body language, facial expressions, things like that in order to figure out if they're going to perform well at the job or not. And surprise, surprise, even though there are so many companies in this space and this has been going on for so many years and tens of millions of candidates have been put through these demeaning AI job interviews, not one of them has released any evidence that this stuff works. I think these are elaborate random number generators, basically. And in the few instances that investigative journalists have managed to get a hold of them, what they have found is that you take a video of a candidate speaking and you digitally alter it so that it looks like they have glasses or they have a bookshelf in the background or these kinds of superficial things that have nothing to do with the content of what is being said dramatically changes the score. And you can imagine why, because in the training data that the system has looked at, there might have been a correlation between candidates who had bookshelves in the background and those who perform better. But that doesn't mean if you take a given candidate and put a bookshelf in their background, they become a better employee. So the core logic at the heart of these systems is kind of nonsensical. So that's another kind of AI snake oil.
That's a really fascinating example. And yeah, you can easily imagine all of the ways it could be misused. I've thankfully never had to experience one of these AI hiring processes, but I've heard of people, know people that have gone through it and how demeaning it can be, as you were saying. One of the things that I think, the reason why you're such a perfect guest for this series on bullshit is that you actually pick up on Harry Frankfurt's ideas that he talks about it on bullshit. So how did Harry's thoughts influence some of your thinking on artificial intelligence?
It's a really good way of thinking about chatbots. Again, to clarify, this is not to deny the usefulness of chatbots. They, can be very useful despite not necessarily having any intentionality of what they're doing or merely simulating human speech, etc. I use them all the time, but they're only useful if we understand their limitations. And I think the main thing we need to understand with respect to their limitations is precisely this idea of bullshit. They are trained to be persuasive. And to the extent that they are truthful and accurate, which they often are, not always, they often are, that's just a side effect of being more persuasive, right? So in a sense, the persuasiveness goal supersedes the truthfulness and accuracy goal. And this is super important to keep in mind. And one way in which this comes up is these days you have these quote unquote reasoning chatbots. And what they'll do is they'll generate a string of intermediate words that's just a quote unquote thinking process, again, very different from human thinking, but somehow helps the chatbot to finally produce an answer. But we have to understand how these things are designed. Once they've produced that answer, they can no longer access those thinking words that they produced, right? And so then you ask this bot, "Hey, how did you come to your answer?" It literally doesn't know, and it doesn't know that it doesn't know. So it will very fluently make up a reason for why it gave you the answer that it gave it, right? So unless we have this mental model of what these bots are being trained to do, how they do it, what data they do and don't have access to, we're very liable to get fooled into, believing an answer or believing that the chatbot gave an answer for a particular reason, etc.
When it comes to artificial intelligence, there are wild claims that people make about its broader significance, from the AI doomer perspective that AI is going to destroy the planet, destroy the world, kill off humanity, to the ultra optimistic singularity viewpoint that we're going to merge our consciousness intelligence with AI and live forever and live like gods. Obviously, these are two extremes, sort of similar in a way. It seems that people that have been doomers become singularity supporters, and people that once believed the singularity become doomers. But how do you think about these broader, almost religious aspects that people imbue when they talk about AI?
Sure. So while I don't necessarily agree with these extreme predictions of the future, whether utopia or dystopia, I do think it's a good thing that people are thinking about what the future might be like with AI, and I think it's a good thing that some of them have more extreme perspectives. When we look back a couple of hundred years, we do live like gods now compared to before the Industrial Revolution, and so these claims are not a priori absurd, and a lot of people have thought through them in great detail. Again, I disagree, and we've written about why we disagree, both in the book and in other writings on our newsletter. But yeah, I think I think it's a healthy discourse. I think where it gets very unhealthy is when people seem certain enough of these extreme predictions, or when they say, "Oh, you can't be certain, so you have to assume that it might happen with, let's say, a 10% probability that AI might take over and extinguish humanity," and therefore policymakers have to get together to take extreme action to avoid such a scenario. And often that extreme action ends up being something that calls for a world authoritarian government, right? That can strictly control the development and deployment of AI technologies. I mean, I'm all for, more philosophical writing on the stuff, but where it jumps the line into actual actions and policy, which have negative consequences for so many people here and now because of some imagined sci-fi utopia or dystopia, that's when it becomes really problematic.
If there's one parting thought that you could leave listeners with in just terms of how they think about AI, how they go about and interact with it, um, is there something that you'd want people to take with them and remember when they're using the chatbots or when they're using any AI product?
So when we're talking about generative AI, right, as opposed to the other more hidden types of AI, whether it's predictive AI or things that industries use to optimize, their warehouses and backend operations, those are types of AI that have been used for decades. Generative AI is new. It's an area where there's a lot of hype, but there's one very, very good thing about it, which is that listeners don't need to listen to, any quote unquote experts or pundits out there, including me. They can come to conclusions on their own by using these tools. And I really like to say that everybody is an expert in their own domain, whether you're a lawyer or a doctor or whatever you're considering using AI for. With a little bit of experience actually using these tools, you're going to come to a much better conclusion about what it's good for and what its limitations are, compared to someone whose expertise might be broader in AI, but not specific to your particular use cases. And so that's really the best thing about generative AI. And so I would encourage everybody to experiment with these things.
Yeah, I really do recommend people go and check out your book. I feel like it's a really great introductory book, even though that it's written in a way that someone like me who's not a computer scientist can very easily understand, and it's also written in a fashion that's also entertaining as well. So I really do recommend that people check out AI Snake Oil and look at Harry's book as well, because I think even though Harry wasn't writing about artificial intelligence, it's just you make the connection almost instantly when you're reading it today that his ideas, his work could be applied to it. So Arvind, thank you so much for being a guest on the New Books Network. It was really wonderful to get the chance to speak with you.
Thank you. This was really fun.